Om Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahe Tejasvinavati Tamastu Mavit Vishavahe. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So, Hari Om. So today we're actually going to be starting chapter 7 of the Bhagavad Gita, Jnana Yoga of Knowledge and Wisdom. And throughout the Gita, we talk about knowledge and we're talking about wisdom, as though they're very familiar terms. And when we just look at where we've come to in chapter 7, if you remember, we started out the very first chapter where Arjuna and the conversation is not yet begun, but the backdrop of the conversation indicative of the Pandavas and the Kauravas. The Pandavas, 5 in number, representative of our positive tendencies within, and the Kauravas, 100 in number, far greater, represent the negative tendencies in oneself. So the whole philosophy is based upon how we tackle this battle within us, not outside. The battle is never outside, it's always within, though it's depicted on a battlefield to show how even a leader falls into this mess, a warrior prince, how the enemy is so close. So it was Arjuna's kith and kin who were on the opposing side. So your closest enemy is your desire within you, your mind's impulsiveness. So it's within you, it's not outside anywhere else. So the first chapter is giving a description of that psychology. And Arjuna collapses when he's got to fight the battle. The battle is not in fisticuffs, the battle is very much within our minds. So he's collapsed in an emotional mess. So for one chapter, 11 verses, Krishna just stayed quiet. And the reasoning behind that is knowledge is never taken, it's given. So only when Arjuna seems to have a little bit of maybe insight that he wants to take something of bigger value, that he's ready to hear something, does Krishna begin the sermon in chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita, the knowledge yoga of Sankhya yoga, yoga of knowledge. And thereon, because he understands, he gives the subtlest philosophy from 54 to 72 of who is a realized person. He takes it right up to that stage in offering Arjuna. And in fact, if you understand chapter 2, you don't really need to even go any further. It's the subtlest knowledge given out at the very beginning. That's the method of the Upanishads. They often give out the subtlest knowledge first, not to waste the time of that person who is at that level, so they can get on with it and realize the self will get on with their journey. But alas, we have 18 chapters here, and we're on chapter 7. And Krishna realizes, well, he's asking some questions. He's woken up a little bit, but he really doesn't know what he's going on about. Let's give him something more practical. So the next value, when you've taken in some knowledge or you've got some insight, one must act. One has desire, so one must act in relation to one's will. So he gives out karma yoga. So the formulation of how to act, how to build up that momentum, how to direct your actions. And then in chapter 4, he gives out how to perform service and sacrifice. So he gives out all about yajna, very detailed ideas of how you can perform all of your activities from mental to physical in the spirit of service and sacrifice. Yajna, service and sacrifice, where you act in that spirit, you forego your interests for a bigger cause. In actual fact, that doing that benefits you. And as you go along that path and you turn more introvert, as you drop the bulk of your desires, your mind becomes calmer through karma and karma. But your mind becomes calmer. You're more introverted. You're on that pursuit, which is spiritual. You've understood to some extent that the mundane values of the material life, of chasing within the world, doesn't fix it for you. There's nothing wrong in relating to your world. You have to fulfill your vastness, but it's transient in nature. So that ultimate peace, prosperity, bliss that you're looking for is never going to be maintained if your focus is outwards. So it has to go inwards. And when you've practiced in that method, taking that knowledge of the self, the truth, using that for your evolution, through your karma, you come to a stage of that yogi. And that yogi is that one who's recognized that they want to go inwards to get to that truth. And as you move inwards, you gain a state of dispassion, meaning when we say this word dispassion, a sannyasi in Sanskrit word, but what we mean is that you're more objective to the world. You're introverted. Introverted doesn't mean that you remove yourself from the world, but you've just got that elbow room. You've got a capacity to see things as they are, for what they are, and you're moving inwards on that focus towards something more real, less transient, more permanent. A sannyasi has a dispassionate passion, still has some desires, not as many as the yogi sannyasi, but then pursues, understands what they've got to pursue to refine those desires and drop them to get to that truth. So he describes in chapter 5 what is a yogi, sannyasi, and a jnani. A jnani, that one who's on the very edge to that realization, refined their thoughts and desires. Then in chapter 6, which we've just completed, it seems a long time ago that we met, the yoga of meditation. And everything in that chapter is what? What does it talk about? We just completed, maybe you should be doing the summary. Do you remember? So what was it talking about? What did you recognize? What did you think? Just think, what did you think the yoga of meditation was going to talk about? But what does it, this is an ancient scripture, it's thousands of years old, so it's not just somebody's made it up, but what did it propose in Jnana Yoga, the chapter? Anybody? Most unexpectedly in this chapter, one might think, on the surface. Anyone? Tim?
Surprisingly, that perhaps meditation is the last thing we reach.
So, meditation generally is hawked with yoga in the world today as the first thing you do to calm your mind. But in actual fact, the spiritual path, as in accordance to Vedanta and the Upanishads, it's a process of karma, bhakti, jnana yoga. And meditation is the final stage of your spiritual path. So in the chapter of Dhyana Yoga, it talks about all the things you need to refine first before you get into that sit and meditation. Though it gives you the description of how to do it, what to do, at what stage, it gives you all the bits and pieces to make the full jigsaw, but it strongly emphasizes what goes before to reach that stage. So you make no mistake. So there's no upset, as it were. And now we've gone a third of the way through the Gita, and we're now beginning chapter 7, the yoga of jnanam and vijnanam, knowledge and wisdom. So when we talk about, this chapter has 30 verses, so it's rather short, but when we talk about jnanam, knowledge, we're talking about this all the way through knowledge. Vijnanam, wisdom. In everyday talk, we might mention this word wisdom. We might think this person's wise or that person's wise. Maybe they're an authority in their own field or their own right. They've got wisdom. So this word wisdom is very loosely used in our everyday. Here in the scriptures, it has a connotation that it's used where it's wisdom of truth, to get to that truth, that self. Nothing more, nothing less. So everything else which we talk about generally, you see, generally we might say that person has wisdom because we feel that that person knows something that we don't know. So we feel that they're more elevated than we are. So we feel that that's wisdom. But the wisdom that is talking about here is that truth, and that truth from within us. And once one realizes that, in terms of wisdom, you'll never associate wisdom with any other objective knowledge. It's purely subjective. It's purely about getting to the truth. And it's purely from one's own development, drawing out the truth from within. Vijnanam, wisdom. The rest is knowledge, as it were. So the knowledge, yoga of knowledge and wisdom. And if you look across the board, Vedanta, the word we've discussed before, Veda Anta, a culmination of knowledge to the end, which is wisdom, that transforms into wisdom. Religion, to rejoin, relegare back to oneself, to get to that truth, in essence, not what everybody is generally doing in religion today, unless it's with that definition, it's not religion. Philosophy. Sophie, wisdom, truth. Yoga, to join, not the physical yoga. That helps you settle your physical body, to keep you off the botherations of the body. But the yoga we're talking about is the path, the route to join back to your truth. And in languages across the world and knowledges, when they're talking about the self, they will in somewhat translate as truth, wisdom. something from within which is digested, which gives you a universality which is permanent within you, fulfills you to that absolute. So here's a topic, here's a chapter, the Yoga of Knowledge and Wisdom, which we begin today, which emphasizes what you've got to actually go for, what you've got to do. They're all talking about you've got to get to this truth. And it, in this chapter, it indicates all that it's not, all that this truth is not. So sometimes we may get very confused about what is what, or maybe not even confused. We may get convinced by, this is spiritual and this is not. So it points out very clearly, even in those hazy values, what is it and what it's not. And sometimes it's a little bit harsh because some of the definitions it's going to provide to us sound as though they're spiritual, but it's not. So there is 6 topics here in this chapter. The first topic is talking about the 2 aspects of Brahman, God. 1 to 6. 7 to 11. I'm just reading from the book. How Brahman manifests itself. 3, 12 to 15. The vicious do not know or seek the Brahman. In fact, in this topic, it mentions 4 types of spiritual seekers, and then posits actually in all the 4, there's only one real spiritual seeker. So he unearths, decodes, when you think maybe it's that, not that. The 4 virtuous types who worship God. 4. 5. The deluded seek and gain the infinite fruit. This is the advantage of looking at the Bhagavad Gita, which we're looking at. It divides the verses into topics to make it easier to see the flow of thought and make it easier for us to understand what is actually going on. So the 6th topic, the wise seek and gain Brahman truth. So we can actually, this makes it easier with the topics. And it's actually sometimes really difficult because if we didn't have this topic method, because the verses are cryptic and terse sometimes for us to read on face value. So we sometimes they seem contradictory. So this divides it very clearly and makes it straightforward for us. So much appreciated to Swamiji, Swami Parthasarathi, who's compiled the book, the Bhagavad Gita, its commentary. There's an authenticity, I feel, of this in particular Gita. So we can start on verse 1. Before we go ahead, is there any question? Okay. Vidya, you can read the...
Chanting the first verse, Arunji.
Yes.
Shri Bhagavanuvacha Maya Saktamana Partha Yogam Yunjamadashrayah Asamshayam Samagram Mam Yada Jnasyasi Tachrunu.
Mm-hmm. Valma, if you could read the verse.
The blessed Lord said, O Partha, with the mind attached to me, practicing yoga, taking refuge in me, how you shall without doubt know me fully, that you do hear.
So, as you know, and as we've seen in the Gita, it's a conversation between Krishna and Arjuna, and a beauty Q&A going on. So remember, as you go along this path, your obligation is to ask questions and think, reflect. And here it's giving a demonstration of that. So normally, you know, Arjuna will ask a question and Krishna will answer. Or sometimes Krishna will start because he's understood where Arjuna's up to, and he's now carrying forward to encourage Arjuna on his path of how to sort of direct him so he draws out that knowledge himself. So he says, Shri Bhagavan Uvacha, oh, by the mind attached with me. And when it uses me generally across the Gita or the Upanishad, especially here, because it's me is referring to Krishna in one sense. Krishna is representative of the self. So it's not talking about Mr. Krishna, it's talking about the self. So when the mind is attached to me, remember the mind is that fickle aspect in us. So we need to place it on something which is less impulsive and transient and more permanent. So when your mind is calm, you can focus it on the self, something more universal. With a strong intellect, you gain that capacity to do that and place it on then the action that you are supposed to pursue when it's focused on its ideal, and bring it back to perform the action. So the body engages in the action, the mind's focused on the higher ideal. The intellect makes that distinction, and then you allow yourself to pursue that right action. So mind attached to me, practicing yoga, without a doubt, a samshaya, he says. You'll know me fully. You'll get that wisdom, in fact, without a doubt. So the suggestion is that one is separated from the self, but if one focuses on the self, you can get back to it. Vedanta, philosophy, religion all mean the same. Yoga, and in many, many other cultures or languages globally seeking the truth, they will come to that same value. So right now, our body, mind, and intellect is focused on the world. So he says, oh, Partha, I'll teach you. Without a doubt, if your mind's focused on me, we'll get to the truth. So as you think, if you're thinking, you have to observe it for yourself. If you're thinking on a particular scenario in your life, you keep thinking on that. Or if you're constantly watching things which are negative or violent, you too start to begin to think those things are okay. If you're thinking on something more refined, then you can make that distinction between what's not appropriate to yourself and what's appropriate. If you're thinking on the knowledge of the self, you're always thinking on the bigger universal perspective, because the self and truth are universal. They don't belong to anybody, they belong to everybody. So when your mind is fixed, when your mind is fixed on me, he's saying, the self, certainly you'll get there. So when the mind turns introverted, if the mind's always focusing on the world of what I can get out of it, there's so many distractions. But the minute you give yourself, it's important to give yourself that opportunity in the morning to sit and take in knowledge, reflect on it. You give yourself a strength. It's just like doing training at a gym. You give yourself that strength to actually hold the bigger values and understand them. That reflection gives that digestion, just as you wouldn't eat food, gobble it down and feel it will be okay. You know, sometimes people get enthusiastic about taking knowledge, they gobble all the knowledge down, but they don't allow it to be reflected upon. If you can imagine gobbling all the food down and it not being digested, you get indigestion and you may give up that food very quickly. Well, here, take in the knowledge, preferably in the early hours of the morning. Reflect on it, let it settle, begin to make it your own. Asamshaya, you'll get there to the truth. It needs that consistency of purpose. On that, we've just begun the first verse, and I believe I'm to remove myself from the class for you to continue with the jobs that you've got to do today. And we'll come back to it next week. I suggest before I go, when you are looking at the Gita, before we come to class, maybe if you can read the verses, it will be helpful. And it will also enable, if there's any questions or queries before it passes by, then we can bring them up. Surely whatever your questions are going to be maybe what others are asking too. So it's helpful. So enable yourself to do that. So it means we've come to chapter 7. Allow yourself that time to study, reflect in the morning. Brahma Murta, 4 to 6, but whenever you can. Okay. Hari Om.
Thank you, Paraji.